Good morning. We are in Ayin Beis. My edition is the volume 3, and essentially the last close to 200 pages that we're reviewing. Though we learned it already, but reviewing it after we've learned inside the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Mika Hashem Elokeinu, Abner Hashem Nishmasadam Ner Mitzvah Teira Ohr, which is a big basis of the ideas that are being explained here in Ayin Beis, with the addition of these 110 pages that the Rebbe Rashab is saying, needly Levayer, to explain this idea of Ner Hashem Nishmasadam and mitzvahs and Teira Ohr. He's explaining with the concept of Ohr Hariyah, vision, eyesight. And this is based on another mimer of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, mainly Mittler Rebbe, based on a mimer of the Alter Rebbe called Ve'inenu Me'ires, that has now been published, but I posted it on the group, so you can see the actual mimer, and it's based on a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, which is called the same mimer, same name on the Siddur, and Maimore Azal is Maimore Admuram Tzai, page 460. That is printed, but that's the basis. But the main bulk of this mimer, the main texts are taken from the Mittler Rebbe's mimer. So the Rebbe Rashab is combining, and with that, developing the idea that we're talking about in the interface of how you take something that is complete the state of darkness and transform it to become an illumination and a manifestation of divine expression, of divine gilui, of divine revelation. And in the process, we learned there's Ohr Mashpia, there's Ohr Mekabel. Both are called Ohr. It doesn't say one is Ohr and one is Keli, which you would think Mekabel is the Keli, the container, and Ohr is the Mashpia. No, both are called Ohr because Ohr Mekabel, like the moon, as he gave the example, or for that matter, the luminous stone, and even the eye, they all have light. The question is what form it takes. So usually we think of light as revealed light. So the sun, as he said, has Ohr Mitzadatz. It's not just a moyer, it's also Ohr, in the words he used. He says like this, meaning that it is actually radiating revealed light. But the Levana is also called a moyer, as he said. Moyer HaKotten. It says Shnei Moyer says Moyer HaGodel, Moyer HaKotten. A moyer means a luminary. If the moon was just a recipient, it wouldn't be called a moyer. So what type of moyer is it? It's a moyer that does not have Ohr Mispashet, he calls it. It's a moyer that is a moyer that has not yet come to be actively giving off revealed light, but it has light within it. The way it gives off light is when it's triggered by another moyer, in this case, the sun. So therefore, it's in a state of concealment. And then he says, Lamaila, that would be the level of Lamaila, in case that you have both the Koyach HaGili and Koyach HaHelam. The Eibush has two Koyachs. So the two Ma'oris reflect two powers of God. One, the power to reveal, and one, the power to conceal. He calls it the Koyach HaHelam and the Koyach HaGili. And his capacity to radiate, to light, his capacity not to light. So in that sense, the moon is also an atzmi in that sense. However, for it to actually give off light as we know it, that's visible to the naked eye, that is through the trigger of the sun. And like he said, that's the sun that causes it, but it radiates with its own light, the Levana. It's not the sunlight. It's not a mirror of the sun. It's its own light, but it's triggered by the sun. And it also has Ohr HaShemesh that has been changed and been so-called become like part of the moon. So he said in the parentheses above, that we learned yesterday. Okay. And even after the sun is not there, like after sunset, the moon continues to shine, like he said before with the Talmud and the teacher. That even when the teacher is not there, the student can shine, can teach to others the idea, because he has a mind. He's not just a funnel. If it was just a microphone, if the teacher is not at the microphone is not going to give off any sound. But the student has his own mind. And now that it's been triggered by the teacher, he can then teach. And the more distance he has from the teacher, the more he'll teach, because he's not overshadowed by the teacher, as he said here as well. Okay. Then comes another form of Ohr Mekabel. We talk about the moon, like a student. Before he called about it like a spouse, like a woman who gives birth. She herself is giving birth, but it's triggered through the seed of the husband. So now he says there's another form of Ohr Mekabel. We call the Ohr B'Etzem, the luminous stone. So here the difference between the luminous stone and the moon is he says luminous stone is not a Ohr Atzmi. The moon, he says, is created as a Mo'er. The stone was not created. You don't call a glowing stone a Mo'er. Number one, it doesn't illuminate the darkness. It just is not covered up by the darkness. In other words, it glows even at night. So he explains that too is Ohr Mekabel, and we know that light comes from the sun or from the stars, but the stone retains it. That's what's key here. Not that the stone is just, again, like a mirror. If you take away the light, the mirror will not reflect anything. The stone retains it because it has properties that retain, he says, nikne behem. However, it does not, but because Sharigam Smith says, Ohr B'Etzem. So it's not like the Levana, or like a teacher, like a student and a teacher. Because it's a daimon posh. At the end of the day, it's a mineral. You don't call it, it's a part of daimon posh, it could call mini daimon, but it has those properties. So some daimon, for example, some stones are the color blue, some are color gray, some are color brown. You're not going to say that because of that, it's something fundamental different. It's still a stone. In this case, the stone has properties that allow it to glow and be luminous. It's not like, and yet it is an entity that has a glow to it. It's not the sun, because it has absorbed, its properties allow it to absorb light, to allow it to glow in the dark, or to glow in general. Yeah. But so it's Ohr Mekabel. Now, all this is a moshel, obviously, meaning it's in physical world, but it's going to serve as an example to understand how this is Beruchnius, which we're going to learn later. Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud are going to be these three levels: the Ohr Alavona, the Ohr of the Even Tev, the luminous stone, and now we're going to go over to Ohr Hariyah. So now we have to go back to Ohr Hariyah. And remember, Riyah, eyesight, sight, and vision is the real key point here, because that's where it all began. He's coming, the Ohr Hariyah is coming to explain Torah Ohr and their mitzvah, and the ideas we've learned before about an neshama illuminating this world. So we're going to get back to Ohr Hariyah throughout these next 110 pages, but right now he's going to compare Riyah to these two levels of moonlight, the moon and the luminous stone. And remember, the Ohr HaShemesh goes in the category of Ohr Mashpia. These three, the moon, the luminous stone, and Riyah, are all called Ohr Mekabel. Like he said, but he said before, Tchar and Nukva. So there's the Mashpia that gives off its own light, and Mekabel that gives off light, but it needs to be triggered. But it has its own atzmizdik power, especially the moon, and the luminous stone does not, but the moon does. And the eye, as we're going to see, is a paradox that is neither like the moon nor like the luminous stone, and it has something that, okay, let's learn that inside. We're going to learn it now inside. But in case, before I continue, if anybody wants to ask, clarify anything, by all means, but keep in mind that all this is coming to explain ultimately the interface, as I said, in gradations, in stages of how we move from complete darkness to light. It doesn't just jump. We don't just become from complete darkness like a sun. You go through the different levels of how we absorb light and how we, like a student. First he receives the light before he gives off light. And as I mentioned, this week's parsha is actually that theme. The Kohen Gadol lights the menorah, but he has to wait till the flame rises on its own. So you see two things, that it's receiving, someone has to light it, but once it's lit, it's supposed to burn on its own, which is ultimately the real dir b'tachtenim, is when this world is not just receiving light from Torah or from higher worlds or from malachim or from our higher spiritual entities, that this world itself will become a source of light, that not just illuminate, like we say, L'asad Laveh, and Mashiach coming, we talked about the different levels of complete clarity and vision, that we, the flesh itself, will see godliness. Even Mikir Tizak, the stone in the wall itself will declare, cry out. It won't need something else to reveal it, because it itself will be so saturated with godliness that it itself will give it off. But that's after years and years of work, of receiving, like a student. First you have to be a student, a Mekabel, before you become a mashpia. This is all part of understanding that whole concept. So with that said, before I continue, if anybody wants to ask anything, and then we'll continue the review. Okay. So now he's going to go to the third, Ohr Hariyah. Again, I'm not going to read everything. I'll select, but some pieces are very critical and very fundamental, so I will read them. I'm looking now at the lower paragraph at the bottom of page 1353. Again, the pages can be found if you have the third volume in the earlier edition, great. If you don't have that earlier edition, the later edition has not reached, so they haven't yet printed with footnotes this section, but you can find the pages at ayinbeis.com, where all of this has been scanned into PDF files. Okay. He says now, now that we've explained sunlight, which also includes candlelight, he mentioned also a flame, Eish, and we've explained the moon, the Ohr Mekabel, and the luminous stone. Now we need to understand, what is Riyas Ayin? How does it work? How does the Ayin work? Because the Ayin is, of course, the eye sees things. So clearly there's an illumination going on. What's the process? What are the dynamics of eyesight, of sight, and of vision? And then this will go back to explain the whole bigger picture as it is in the moral and the themes of Ayin Beis. So he says, Dihine, Ein Hariyah, Ein Ohr Atzmi. The TV. Ohr Hariyah, using the words he said before about the sun and even about the moon, says it's not an Ohr Atzmi v'TV. Ohr. It's not a fundamental source of light and a natural source of light. Hainu, which means Hainu b'chinas Ohr HaMeir. He's qualifying. We're not talking about that there's no element of clarity or light, but as an Ohr HaMeir, a light that shines. The eye itself is not an Ohr Atzmi TV, the way we understand an eye, a physical eye. Shari Ein Meir B'Layla. If it would be, it would radiate by night. Even the moon shines at night. Though the moon is Ohr Mekabel, because it is, at the end of the day, a Moir, and it has a certain Moir Atzmi to it. It's a different, functions differently than the sun, but it shines at night. And for sure the sun shines. The Ein Roya B'Ohr Hariyah Ki Im B'Yom. And we only can see, our vision works only by day, daylight. Kishemer Ohr HaShemesh, when the sun is shining. Oy B'Layla Ohr HaNeir, or at night when there's a candle shining, a lit candle. So you see from that you cannot call the Riyah Ohr Atzmi TV, that it itself is a source of light. In other words, if there's darkness, you're not going to turn to the eye to illuminate the darkness. You'll turn to the sun, to the moon, to a candle. He's not mentioning the moon, probably not to confuse it with Ohr Mekabel, but bottom line is, the eyes will not illuminate on their own, and the best proof is in the context of by night. Im kein harihu gam kein b'bchinas Mekabel. So that puts it into the category of a Mekabel, not a mashpia. Ohr, of Ohr, we're talking now. Because if it's a mashpia of Ohr, it would give off light. Because Mekabel Ohr zulase oz yira. when it receives the light of another, in other words, an external light, in this case, the sun, a candle, or whatever it may be, then it sees. Okay, that's point number one. So it's Ohr Mekabel, but it's not very, but it's going to be very different than the other Ohr Mekabels that we learned before. And we're going to find out that it has something that's an atzmi that is higher than all the levels, as we'll soon see. The Ima Yesha Ayin Sfiri Ubehiri, he continues to explain. Even though we just said that the eye does not give off light, it's still not like the ear or the nose. The very matter, Chemes Sfiri means it's a transparent matter. If the eye were like, for example, just like your finger, even in the daylight, it wouldn't see. So in other words, the eye is structured. Its anatomy is a Ohr Sfiri, Chemes Sfiri, Ubehiri. So it's fundamentally conducive and structured in a way that can see things. It's not in other words, it's not a fundamentally dark entity. On the contrary, it has a lens, has a pupil, has an iris. You know, the whole structure of the eye is made when there's light shining, the eye will see, and other parts of the body won't see. So he's saying, even though that's true, the Ohr B'Etzem, and the Ohr B'Etzem, the light of the of vision, is Ohr. You cannot say it's not Ohr. This is key. In other words, the fact that we call something Ohr, we have to realize, we already learned that before. You can call the Levana Moir, but it doesn't give off revealed light until something triggers it. So same thing here, in a different way. It can be it could have the ingredients, it could have the properties of light, like we see that light enters through the eye, and as a result, the eye can see things. So, but nevertheless, it's not Ohr Mashpia. Ki'im b'chinas Ohr Mekabel. So what he's adding here is that even though the structure of the eye is essentially made to be able to see, and therefore it's an illuminating entity, but you can't call it an Ohr Mashpia because it doesn't illuminate on its own. It illuminates only when it's Mekabel from another light, meaning it's not receiving its power to see from the other light. The other light shines, and that's when the eye can function properly. It can reflect, it can see the different opinions of how the eye sees. But the eye itself is a seeing entity. Again, it's not like a mirror. It's not like you shine a light, so the eye reflects it. No, the eye sees. However, it cannot see without an external light shining. So that turns it into Ohr Mekabel. And then, dafka, the eye can see, and other parts of the body are not visual faculties. Okay. The Kashem Mekabel. So why is it called Mekabel? The Kashem Mekabel Ohr HaShemesh, or Ohr HaNeir, when it receives from the light of the sun, the shining, or the candle light, Oshureya, then the eye sees. Now he's going to analyze this further now. It says like this: V'tolei hariyeh b'teikef Ohr HaShemesh. It's just not just a one-time thing. The different levels of light actually affect your eyesight. For example, can you see the same way in the dark? We know we can't see. There's daylight when it's shining very brightly. There's the dusk or the dawn where you were twilight, for example, where the eye can see, but it's not going to see as well as it sees in broad daylight. So he says that Riyah is also told in the Teikef Ohr HaShemesh, in the intensity of the light of the sun, Oy HaNer, or the candle, same thing. A very, very light, small candle, the eye will have to squint, will have to work harder to see. It can't see as clearly. The Kasheyiyah Ohr B'Etzem, where the light is more increased, which could be more intense or more quantity, more quality, then he'll see longer distances. And will also see more subtle entities. Where, for example, in twilight or in a dark or in a shade, you may not be able to discern certain details. Gufim dakim basically means subtle. Dakim here meaning subtle, very things that are not as obvious. So you'll see a tree, for example, but will you see all the intricate details of the tree? So if the light is too weak, you'll see, but you're not going to see the gufim dakim, and you won't see as distant as he says. So what you see from this, it's that the Ohr Hariyah is not just that you need a light to shine. That light actually affects of how well you will see. So that just makes it even more dependent, the Ohr Mekabel of the Riyah, on the mashpia, meaning whatever the source of light is that's shining. Again, all this is going to be relevant to the bigger subject. So that's why I'm going through it in very specific detail. So now he's going to explain this because l'cheri yesh mokem leimer. Seemingly, there's room to argue that it shouldn't be that way. She'ena gam b'chinas mekabel. That the Riyah maybe you could argue is not a mekabel. The Riyah hu mepnei she'ashemesh me'iras adovan anira. She'ena gam b'chinas mekabel. The Riyah, like we said, the Riyah comes due to the fact the sun is shining. So it's shining over the object that the eye is seeing. And that's how he sees it. Once the light shines on the object, so you see, let's say, here's a table. The light is shining, the sun is shining. So I see the table because the sunlight has revealed there's a table here. So you could argue, why are you calling it a Mekabel? Mekabel would be like the moon. The moon clearly reflects the sun. Why would you say the eye? You could argue the eye doesn't reflect the sun. It's true. It needs the sun to be able to see. But why do you call it Ohr Mekabel? I mean, this is only a havamin. It's only considering this. He's going to answer that's not the case. But seemingly you could argue that the sun shines a light, and independent of that, now that there's a light shining, the eye could see. But it sees on its own. It's not seeing because of it's receiving something from the sun. The luminous stone, we said earlier, comes, there's properties in the stone that allows it to glow, but the glow doesn't come from it comes from the sun. Is the root of it. The same thing with the moon. But with the eye, you could see that it's two separate things. The sun shines. Once the sun is shining, then you can see an object. So the eye can see. Why are you calling the Riyah Mekabel Ohr? I'm on the next page, 1354. Because the sunlight has illuminated a dark state, so now there's sunlight. Therefore, the eye can see. But why are we calling the eye therefore Ohr Mekabel? So it's true in broad terms. You could say it's Mekabel in the sense that it can't see on its own unless there's another light. But it's not actually receiving that. It's not like a student and a teacher. A student is actually listening to his teacher, absorbing, and that triggers in his mind the ideas that he begins to understand, and later can teach it. But in the eye, are you saying the sun is triggering something in the eye for the eye to see, or the sun is shining and therefore the eye could see? Which is the consideration he's saying right now. That's not shouldn't be called, technically it shouldn't be called the Ohr Mekabel. We'll see where he's going now. He's going to actually obviously not negate that. But l'cheda, he said, yesh mokem leimer. So now we continue. Under Rayim. And in truth, when you look at it, when you study this and evaluate it further, Rayim, the Ikar Hariyah toli betuv klei ayin. Before we said that the ability to see will be dependent on how strong the light is. Stronger light, you can see more distant, you can see more subtle items. But he says the truth is that the Ikar Hariyah is totally on how good the eyesight is. Betuv klei ayin. How good your eye is. B'tzadatzmei. Like there are people who have 20/20 vision. There are people who are nearsighted. There are people who are farsighted. That's not dependent on the light in the room. It's true the light contributes in a darker room if it's maybe harder to read. But there is something also about the eye. It's not completely dependent on the external light. Ikar Hariyah toli betuv klei ayin b'tzadatzmei. Da kasher chemer ha'ayin chazak b'tekev k'yech Hariyah. Yeser, that when the chemer eye, when the physical eye is in better shape, stronger, yuchel yiris lemerachik begufim dakim. That will help you. That allows you to see longer distances, distant, and gufim dakim and subtle items, subtle entities. Gam kishein era yemer kalkach. Even when the light of the day is not that intense. In other words, It's not completely dependent on light. A person who has better vision will see, even if it's dusk or twilight or it's not so bright outside, will see better than someone else. So you see, it's not completely dependent on the light. It's dependent on how good the eye is. So that's only making the case to say that Riyah is not the Ohr Mekabel, completely at least. Because you see, the Riyah itself is a factor here. The eye itself is a factor. Okay. The gamma at Eryem, Mekabel, one second, gamma at, one second. V'hainu kashachem ra'ayin hu betuvi b'yeser ve'era riyah meir b'yeser. So he's explaining, he's elaborating a bit more. When the physical eye is healthier or stronger, and the Ohr Riyah therefore manifests in it more, because that's what it comes down to, the Keli and the Ohr. The power of vision we have. But if the eye, either due to age or due to just the fact that it has somewhat eroded, that, as I said, nearsighted or farsighted, so the Ohr Riyah doesn't shine so well in the Chemer Ayin because that is weaker. But when it's stronger and the Ohr Riyah Meir B'Yeser, and the power of vision shines through it increasingly more, Hari Mekabel Sa'ir B'Yeser, it receives the light in a more powerfully. So the outside light that is illuminating, because the eye is better and therefore the vision is better, so it receives that light in a stronger way, and therefore even a little light of the daylight, and a little sunlight is enough for him to see a lot. Whereas if someone who has weaker vision, even if with stronger light, stronger daylight and sunlight, will not see as well. So you see here, there's a combination. There's obviously more two factors here. But what he's introducing is something he didn't say before. Before he was just talking about how our vision and sight is dependent on the outside light shining. Now he's saying the eye itself has much to say about this, because its properties have an effect as well. We're not finished. He's going to tie it all together. And also in this aspect that we're discussing now, you can say, he's taking it even further. So you could say, okay, fine. It's not just the external sunlight or daylight or external light that affects, it's also the very eye. But the light of the sun or the external light does make a strong impact here. But now he's saying you could even say less than that the whole role of the sun is just to remove the darkness. It's not really contributing to light itself. Before you could say, the whole point was, first he was saying that everything seems to come from the external light. Then he said, no, the eye itself sees once there's a light. But you can still say the light's been mashpia into the eye. He's saying now, you could say that the light is only there to remove the concealment. So for example, let's say something's hidden in a chest. And I open up the chest, then I see it. So my opening the chest affects my vision? No, my vision is not Mekabel, receiving anything from me opening the chest. Opening the chest, I've removed the block. Now my eye can see. So he's saying, Yesh Lemi, you could say the same thing with sunlight. Just to remove the block. It doesn't have any effect on the vision at all. It's a side thing. It's important because if you don't remove the block, the eye can't see. In this case, what's blocking is darkness. So this makes it even stronger that the Riyah has its own, it's not necessarily Ohr Mekabel completely. It still needs light because it can't see on its own in the dark. But you see here, he's developed the whole case to say that number one, the eye itself is a factor because it sees. The strength of the eye and the eye structure determines how well you'll see. And now he's going further and saying that that you could say that the outside light is just to remove the concealment. And then he sees with the power of the eyesight, and therefore when it's stronger, he sees even with a little light. But here he goes even further. The little light is just removing the darkness. As soon as you remove it, even a little, a strong eye is going to see properly. So we're left here still unclear, is Ohr Mekabel or not? Now, the mere fact that he's the Shakavitaria here, back and forth, you see clearly why is the Rebbe Rashab why is it so important to know? Because as you remember, two classes back, I explained, because the whole point here is ultimately in the interface, we want to combine both Mashpia and Mekabel. We want to be able to receive from above, but we want it to be ours as well. So Ohr Mekabel is a very critical piece here. Because remember, it's not just that God is coming to shine light on us like sun. Gave us the Torah Ohr. As I explained, Torah Ohr, we have to also study Torah, and we have to integrate it, and we have to struggle with it. Because Dira b'Tachtenim means that the Tachtenim are internalizing and integrating the godliness. So it's not just some technical semantics here, is it a Mekabel and not a Mekabel? He wants to ultimately really bring the two together. And Riyah is going to ultimately be the best example because Riyah is going to have both extremes. On one hand, it does not shine at all in the dark, not like the moon or a luminous stone. On the other hand, it itself sees. So that's why he's really going into the intricate details. Is it a Mekabel, is it not? And telling us, first it's dependent on outside light, but then the eye itself is also a factor here. And furthermore, Yeshlema, you could say that the outside of light is only to remove the darkness. So let's take an avodah. When we learn Torah today, Torah Ohr, to understand what to do, what not to do, that's because we can't figure it out on our own. God created us in a way that your body tells you when you're hungry, but your neshama, you can't feel, most of us cannot feel when the neshama needs a mitzvah. Therefore, we need to look in Shulchan Aruch and says, Shabbos is coming. Oh, Shabbos is coming. Here's what I have to do. Why don't we just feel it instinctively? Why don't we just feel it naturally? If it's an intrinsic part of who we are, because God concealed that. He made that the Torah and His will should be concealed. So when you learn Torah, it's like an illuminating light. So you could say, is it illuminating? In the sense that it is actually giving us the power, or it's just removing the darkness. Once you remove the darkness, then the neshama can shine and see on its own. That's how relevant this is going to be as we go later. Again, I'm just giving a preview because we're doing the big overview here. So this mashal is not just, as I said, just an analysis of how how eyesight works. It's coming to understand, and when you think of it that way, you realize how fascinating God's creation is. He created different entities: a moon, a luminous stone, an eye, a sun, all to give us examples in our palpable examples in our lives of the different levels of how we can transform ourselves from a dark state to a bright state. And so it's all going to be relevant in the bigger discussion as we go further. Again, I'm taking this from the Maimer Inene Me'iris of the Mittler Rebbe, as well as what we've learned already, and we're going to learn about understanding how all these different elements are. That our eyes will see like the sun and the moon. That's already a level where the eye is able to see on its own, so to speak. But we'll get to that as well. I just wanted to contextualize this. So now he's going to conclude and tell us why, at the end of the day, Ohr Ari is called Ohr Mekabel. But in case anyone wants to ask anything about what we learned till now, let me pause and stop if anybody wants clarity. And now he's going, as I said, he's going to go back and tell us exactly. So what is going on with Riyah? Is it we did call it Ohr Mekabel? The question is why. He's going to explain that now. Okay. Well, be'emes tzarich leimer, the Rebbe Rashab continues now. I'm essentially on 7 lines from the top of page 1354. Shehu b'chinas Ohr Mekabel. You have to act, in truth, we have to say that Ohr Ariyah is Ohr Mekabel. Even though he just made a case that you could say it's not. Not that it doesn't need external light, but that it's not a Mekabel per se, like a student from a teacher. You have to say it's Ohr Mekabel. At the end of the day, the light of the eye is not a light that can radiate and illuminate the darkness. The im hoya er mashpia, if it was truly an er mashpia, it would illuminate the darkness like the sun. So now he's giving us another element of Ohr Mekabel. It's true that the eye doesn't necessarily receive the light from the sun like the moon does, or like a student does from a teacher, but to call it Ohr Mashpia, you cannot either. Because if it's Ohr Mashpia, it would give off light, also in darkness. Let's see where he goes with this. She could argue, okay, it's not called Ohr Mashpia, but why do you call it Ohr Mekabel? So let's see. And because of that, that's not an Ohr Mashpia. In order to see, it needs support, it needs help from an external light, a light outside of itself. So that's how he's defining Ohr Mekabel now. That the Mekabel means that it needs to receive from a light outside of itself. That doesn't mean it has to receive, like I said, like a student from a teacher. But mashpia, it's not. But it's so therefore it needs something. And that need defines its reason is called Mekabel. The need that it has in order to be able to see. Umakol mokim, but as we just established, it's not like Ohr Mekabel like the others. Hariyah hi bo'er hariyah atzmei. The actual vision of the eye is with its own power. In other words, the sun doesn't make the eye see. The eye is a seeing entity. It just cannot see in the dark, and you need to remove the concealment. But it's not that the sun makes the eye see. If the sun made the eye see, then it would be a very different type of scenario. Then it would be that the eye is not really a seeing entity. The eye is like the moon. Well, the moon is not maybe a good example. It's like a luminous stone. It has properties that when the sun shines through it, it sees things. But we know that's not the case. The eye is a seeing entity. And once there's a light shining and you remove the darkness, the eye itself sees. You don't say that about the moon or about a luminous stone. The moon does not see. It's not like the light of the moon, whose light comes through the light of the sun. That shines within it. And without the light of the sun, the moon has no light of its own. So you'll say, 1 second, didn't we say earlier that it does have a light, it just doesn't shine? And you need the sun to trigger it, so he qualifies that in the parentheses. V'hainu, gam lefi now. Even according to above, what we said, that the moon shining is its own light, that own light is dafka through the Eir HaShemesh. Whereas the eyesight is not the Eir HaShemesh, just removes the darkness. It's not the light of the eye is dependent on the sun. That's how he's qualifying it. Mashenkin Eir HaRiyah, by contrast, eyesight or vision, hu b'chinas Ohr B'Etzem. It's Ohr B'Etzem, the U'Be'er HaRiyah Atzmei Hureya. And it's with the light of the eye itself that he sees. The eye has that capacity. However, since the eye in the eyeball, since the eyesight within the eye is not a Ohr Atzmi, and the b'chinas Ohr Mashpia, meaning it's not a Ohr Mashpia, l'hoyeres acheshech, to radiate the darkness. Al kein tzorich Ohr zulose l'hoyeres acheshech. That's why it needs an external outside light to radiate, to illuminate the cheshach, v'gam misabiyeh elei ba'ariyah. And that also helps it to be able to see. So he calls it he's calling it a Ohr B'Etzem, but not a Ohr Atzmi. That's how he's defining the eye. And now he's going to prove the case, because you could argue, 1 second, since the eye, he's going now the other way around. You could argue, since the eye cannot see in the dark, so who says? Maybe it is a Ohr Mekabel. Maybe when the sun shines, it's like the moon, the eye. and it's now reflecting the sun, and that's why it's shining, not because the eye has its own power. So he says, the eye is the opposite from daylight. What's the proof that it's Ohr B'Etzem, the light of the eye? And that with its own power it sees. The proof is because in a place where you don't need to illuminate the darkness, meaning, let's say midday, he sees without the help of an outside light. In other words, the eye is seeing. It's not like it needs the outside light to make it see. The outside light, once it's there, the eye sees on its own. That's what most likely what you have to say is saying here. One second, let me just see something. No, let me correct myself. No. I mistakenly read it wrong. Not daylight. He's saying in a place where you don't need to radiate the darkness, even though it's dark, and he's going to give the example of sleep. That's why I'm realizing. So he says, let's read, like during sleep. A person sees many things. Even though it's in a dream and it's like an illusion, it means, therefore, that the power that we can visualize something, even if it's in our minds, and it's not physically seeing it because it's like a dream, but it tells you that the Eir has the capacity to visualize. So this is the proof that he's bringing here. So in a case where you want to see physically, if it's dark, the eye can't see. So there you could argue, is the vision coming from the sun or the sun just removing the darkness? But in the case, for example, when your eyes are closed and you're daydreaming or dreaming at night, like he says here, the power that you can visualize tells you that the eye has a visual power to it. And there it does not need light. It doesn't matter how dark it is. And he gives an example of sleep. But even if you're standing in a dark room, you could also visualize things. That doesn't mean you're seeing it. It just means your eye. So he's clearly identifying ayin now, not just a physical seeing something, but also the visualizing in the mind. Because you could argue that's not eyesight. You could say that's the chacham einav bereshe. That's the eye of the mind, that the mind can visualize things. But it still can visualize. The key emphasis is you can visualize something. We'll soon talk about someone that is born blind, but we could visualize. You close your eyes, you can visualize a table, a chair, an apple. You can visualize the sun even. So you see from that the eye is not just some incidental channel or funnel for the sun or for some external light. It has the power to see. That's what he wants to really emphasize here. Which again is going to be critical because we want to show that we, with our eyes, can ultimately see godliness. Not only as a result of something else showing it to us, but we ourselves can end up seeing it. We'll learn about that later, but that's where he's going with this. And then he continues, Vari Asuma. And now, a blind person. Nikra Moyer Einayim. So the Gemara calls, or in the pasuk, the Gemara, the Chazal call Asuma Moyer Einayim. A Moyer Einayim means a luminary of Moyer Einayim, the eyes of a luminary. She explains, so even Asuma you call a Moyer Einayim. So what do you see from that? I have to read on to see where he's going with this. So let's just read it before I conclude what he's saying. Okay, the mere fact that you call a blind person Moyer Einayim means that it has the power to illuminate, but it's only a mer la'atzme. Like in this case, you can visualize to yourself, but not radiate, not lahoyer, not to shine to another. It's not an Ohr Mashpia B'Etzem. So he's saying here that a blind person could also essentially visualize, is probably what he's saying here. because it's not an Ohr Mashpia B'Etzem. So the sun is an Ohr Mashpia B'Etzem, so radiates and illuminates to everyone around. The eyes don't illuminate, and that's why in darkness it needs light. And even then, your eyes that see don't make someone else see. It's only you're seeing it. And same including when you visualize something. But to the person himself, he does see, like in the case where there's in a dream or visually, because it's Ohr B'Etzem, even though it's not Ohr Atzmi, Ohr Mashpia. That's what he's adding here. Now, he doesn't elaborate here. I think later he does, if I recall correctly. Chassidus asks the question, why is a summa, a blind person, called the Sagi Nohar? Sagi Nohar means abundant light, a lot of light. Sagi is a lot, Nohar. Like Moir Enayim. Chassidus answers, because it sounds like what's called Loig L'Rosh. It's like you're making fun of him. Person can't see, so you're saying he's full of light. Like he sees better than everyone. So it says, no, the answer is, the reason that person cannot see is not because it's darkness, because the filters and the membranes of the eye have been burned out, so to speak. So the lens is compromised. So it's because there's too much light. It's like when you look and you're blinded by the sun. You would think, 1 second, the sun is so much light, you should see better. Why are we blinded by the sun? Because the light is so intense that it neutralizes the eye's ability to filter it and properly see objects in the right context, right light, where things have shades or the different ways we discern through eyesight. So our eyesight is not just that there's light, but the light also has to be measured, has to be filtered properly and regulated properly to see properly. That's what it says. I think he says it later in Ayin Beis here as well, if I recall. I'm almost sure we learned it. I think at the bottom maybe or later. I have to look at it later. But point being is that he's saying here that we say Moir Enayim, it's a Moir, but it's not radiating light. That you need the outside light, but it has an element of light of its own, and that's why we can see things in our minds, in our dreams, and even at night when we're asleep, when there's no light shining. Okay. Let me stop here if anybody wants to comment or ask anything.
So does the blind person does not? I mean, a blind person cannot dream. By we're saying here.
Why not? The opposite. They could dream
because we just said that if we're dreaming, that's the power of the Ma'or of the eye itself. But the person who's blind, right, would be the opposite.
To me, what I just read is the opposite. That a person who's blind, why can't they dream?
It has its own intrinsic ability to see. So a blind person can visualize in its mind, and even
got it.
Exactly.
I have a question.
I mean, there may be a difference between. I know there are people who are born blind, so they never saw anything. So what do they visualize? That could be a question.
That's my point.
Yes, that's not. But he's not addressing that here. So first of all, what about blind? Let's talk about a blind person that was able to see, and then he can't see any longer. So for him, he's always in the dark, but his mind can visualize. That means that the eye has some visual power, even if there's no outside light. As far as a person who's born, I've spoken, when I was in Israel, we went to see the museum for the blind. So there was a person there that was actually blind from birth. If I recall, he told us that he could visualize things. He visualized because the mind has the capacity to visualize. Remember, once you hear sounds, the mind can figure out what is it from a sound, what would it look like? There may be different than what we would visualize, but there is a visual power even for a blind person who's never seen anything. Again, he may not visualize. If you ask him, what does a tree look like? He may not be able to describe it as we would describe it, but he'll have his own description. He'll have some type of, the mind can imagine things. And he's clearly identifying that with Koyach Hariyah here. Because seemingly you think Koyach Hariyah is the actual power to see physical objects. Here he's clearly saying that it's even the Koyach Hadimyan, that we can visualize.
I have a question. Were you finished?
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm jumping here a little bit, but anyways, I'll try. Maybe you won't want to go there yet. Is that this muscle of the eye as a keli that has the capacity to see? Is that a muscle for the sechel enoshi, our human intellect, that could, if trained properly, if given light, siua, can see godliness? That it has the capacity to understand godliness if it intrinsically, even though it needs siua, at least until last 11.
And so you guessed right. Since he's going to discuss it a little later, I'll wait till then. Let's wait till there.
Yeah, it's frustrating though.
So go peek ahead. You could do that if you like.
Well, but I don't know that because he didn't finish the hemshech. You can't really.
No, he talks about it. He talks about it in the next few pages.
All right, I'll go back and look.
It's maybe like the Mari Cheskel, let's say the Merkava. So nobody's ever seen a Merkava. Well, I guess, but he did see faces of animals, and he just kind of put them on. But there is such a thing as imagining what we want, and also when we dream, we're in places where we never were in our life. So we see new things.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what he's saying, that you have the power to visualize, even when there's no outside light. Correct.
But the problem for us is that he's saying vision and imagination is the same thing.
I know the problem. Clearly, he's broadening to the case that
the
Riyah
concept
means
of
that
vision,
the power to visualize, and then there's a physical vision. He's clearly saying that.
Can I just simplify the whole picture? What I hear from your wonderful presentation. I see it as first of all, the key point is power of vision. Yes, it's a power of vision if we will interpret it as an energy. First, energy. Energy is supposed to have a supply. If we are creatures of the earth, we need supply from something physical. We need food, we need the plant need photosynthesis. I would add a very interesting bug, light bug. You know, light bug, I don't know how it's called in English. We call it svetlichok, svet, like light bug. This
Firefly.
bug,
We call it a firefly.
Firefly, yes. So if you will look how it produces light, it works hardly in order to light. From all of this, I assume that as a creature of Earth, we supposed to get vision from some kind of energy that Earth only can supply. For example, yes, sun can give us like a trigger to see food, like an energy supply, and a lot of all kind of very complicated eye structure that give us this capacity. In contra to that, we know that
you're calling this a simple explanation.
No. I just want to give a muscle in order to simplify how I can see. So we have energy, we have structure of the eye, we have a light of the sun as a energy supply in addition. All of this give us a capacity to see. If we will turn a little bit muscle with Moshe when he was on the mountain for 40 days and didn't have eat, but he still had energy. that means his energy supply was straight from the Etzem. That when you said the capacity of C is from Etzem. Yes, you said it's not from. What is it? You said very crucial thing. It's not from. It's from Etzem. As if it is from Etzem, that means all our supplies, energy supplies that we have right now, will start to produce from the Etzem. We would not need, as Moshe didn't need the food to have energy, we would not need energy from our physical supply. We will have this energy straight from Etzem. That means everything what we have right now will still work. The only point that would change is a energy supply.
Okay, let me cut you off here because I have to run. Let me put it this way. This is something that I've spoken about, and we're going to speak about at length in Ayin Beis when he talks about what all this means, Lamaila. You asked before, if you want to peek ahead, Yitzchak, or any of you, go to page 1454. That's where he explains this, how it is ultimately in the bigger picture. Right now, we're learning it in the example. And just to sum up what we're learning here, let me say that he's explained correct that there's different elements in when we talk Riyah. I mean, all the Ohr Mekabel, but especially when it comes to Riyah, there's the power of the eye, there's the power of the outside light. But the bottom line, what he wants to say, that the eye has the ability to see. It's an Ohr, what he calls B'Etzem. It's not an Ohr Atzmi, it's not an Ohr Mashpia, at least not today. It's an Ohr B'Etzem, unlike the other Ohr Mekabel. And that's why he qualified and explained that it's like somewhat of, it's some type of unique entity that we're going to discuss, which on one hand needs support. Like I said, it needs outside light to be able to see, but it itself ends up being a seeing entity. It's a seeing entity. That's the most important part to this. And that's what he summed up. And he brought the proofs of the different things, including visualizing, tells you that the eye has the ability to see. It's not just a, like I said before, a mirror of the sun. It's not just that the sun is shining through the eye. The eye itself is created to be a seeing entity. And that's why the very physical eye, the keli of the eye, is dependent on it, how well we see. Not just dependent on the outside light, it's also dependent on the very eye. That's briefly what we've said. What this means in the bigger picture, as I said, I told you what page. We'll learn it as we go along, which I prefer, because then we can really understand it in the context of how the Rebbe Rashab is developing it. And it will help us understand, of course, the whole bigger themes of Ayin Beis that we've been learning. That's what I would do to sum up right now. And yeah. So we'll stop here, close to the bottom of page 1354. And as we learn this, he's going to explain the contrast to the luminous stone and the moon, so we'll understand this better as we go. And then the next page, he'll start explaining what the dogma of this is above. Okay. So let me